Mischa, you are often accused by your critics of being a shill for companies like Monsanto and others that produce these GMOs, but you have actually taken a different approach on labeling than even those companies. Some of those companies say they're willing to have some labeling as long as they kind of have some input on the terms of what goes on those labels, but you think even that would be a bad idea.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. And so to start with, anyone who thinks I'm a shill for Monsanto, they should read my last 3 articles on the Daily Caller. I'm highly critical of Monsanto. I mean, let's just say it right here. Those guys, as you've just implied, they're willing to concede, not just on their business. That's their business. If they want to lose business, fine. They're willing to concede on a field of science. Imagine Thomas Edison or Nikola Tesla doing that with electricity at the turn of the last century. Here we are at the turn of this century with the prospect of feeding the world finally. And yeah, these guys are willing to cave in of GMO labeling. It's a horrible idea for 2 reasons. The first is, gives in by saying there might be something wrong. Otherwise, why would we label it? We don't label things for no reason. The other reason is, in order to have a labeling bill that makes sense, it has to have a threshold level. In other words, there's no such thing as zero in science. You can always detect something at some level, parts per million, parts per billion, even parts per trillion. So it can't be zero. To have a labeling bill that makes sense, it has to have a threshold level. Once there's a threshold level, not only are you giving the bad impression, as I just said, that there might be something wrong, you're actually opening yourself up for a lawsuit. Because if an organic farmer's crop is above that threshold level, you darn right he's going to sue because it's no longer GMO free.
Okay, so the debate is about now whether should we have national standards? Should there be some kind of a national GMO label so we don't have states doing different things? So you think even that would be a bad idea because that would be the first step you think that the activist and anti-GMO crowd would use towards trying to get an all-out ban on GMOs?
Yeah, and again, they might never achieve an all-out ban, but they'll certainly stop new crops from being developed. And there's already a litany of these crops sitting on the back burner. As for the state-by-state and county level GMO banning and labeling campaigns, you just got to fight those. I know it's messy and it'd be much neater to consolidate the whole thing and just do it from the federal level. But hey, wait a minute. We already have a federal law. It's called the National Organic Program. It was written during the Clinton administration and then passed into law, ironically enough, during the George Bush administration. And that is an act of Congress, and it already says quite clearly there's no such thing as contamination by GMOs. It basically says, here's the organic industry, knock yourselves out, and they certainly have knocked themselves out. They're worth more than Major League Baseball now. And then it says over here is GMOs. And the only thing the NOP really talks about is pesticide contamination. That is recognized as the basis for a potential lawsuit between an organic farmer and his neighbor. But there is no such thing as GMO contamination. But again, if we pass a new bill, there will be such thing.
So as we hear pressure and more talk about the need for some type of labeling, and even if that represents a small amount of the percentage of the population, but it sounds bigger than it is, that puts political pressure. We know politicians respond to those types of things. Do you think there's any way to find middle ground here, or do you think it's got to be no labeling at all, period?
I think it has to be no labeling because that's what the organic stakeholders themselves agreed to in 1997-98, as I said, during Bill Clinton's second term. So that was a pretty good political deal. I mean, they had their, if you will, their guy in office. And he was very sympathetic. His Secretary of Agriculture at the time, Dan Glickman, very sympathetic to the organic movement as a whole. And again, look, they have grown now from multi-million to multi-billion under that legislation. So what more could they possibly hope for? Well, they're hoping for all or nothing. They're hoping for the whole enchilada here, if you will, and to strike a blow at the field of science. And remember, it's not just the field of agricultural science. It's the field of science that gave diabetics synthetic human insulin, which we used to get from slaughtered pigs. There's so many things just waiting to happen in this field called genetic engineering. It'll be a combination of pharmacy and agriculture, and they're all on hold. And I would just conclude by saying the organic activists are winning right now.
Yeah, there seems to be a feeling among the pro-GMO people that we need to find a way to appease, to show that we're coming to the middle, we hear your concerns, and we want to try to address them and compromise somewhat. And you feel that's dangerous.
Oh, totally. The only reason that these people believe there's a need to compromise is because the organic stakeholders wrote their own rules. And then, after they wrote their own rules, the rules which say there's no such thing as GMO contamination of an organic crop, they went ahead and just started talking about GMO contamination. And, Mike, not a single farmer has ever been sued. You can get sued for, bumping into someone at the grocery store. People will sue for anything. Well, why hasn't there been a single lawsuit against a GMO farmer for allegedly contaminating the organic crop next to him? It's because there's no such thing. It's impossible. So what the organic activists did was, as I said, they wrote their own rules. They agreed to those rules, and then they just started talking very loudly about this thing they called GMO contamination. And instead of listening, as you've put it so accurately, and instead of saying, hey, we're willing to find common ground, the people at Monsanto and the Farm Bureau and good media people like yourself should all be saying to the activists, the organic activists, go back and read your own rules. You wrote them. Now it's time to read what you wrote. Remember Nancy Pelosi said you won't know what's in the Obamacare bill until we pass it. This bill was passed 13 years ago. It's probably time they read it.
All right, Mischa, thank you. Mischa Popoff, Policy Advisor for the Heartland Institute on AgriTalk.